What he did, and look at what he didn't do. He savagely beat her. He videotaped her. He dumped water on her. He moved her. But he did not help her.
That's a prosecutor today pushing for a guilty verdict for a West Fargo man accused of beating his wife to death. Thanks for joining us here at 6. I'm Justin Betty.
And I'm Stacey Van Dyke. Testimony wrapped up today in Spencer Moen's murder trial, and the case is now in the hands of the jury.
The jury, 10 men, 2 women, are deciding if Moen is guilty of Class AA felony murder in the death of his wife Sonia, meaning he intentionally or knowingly caused her death, acquitting him on all charges, or another option just presented to the jury today, negligent homicide.
Yeah, that's a lesser charge, carrying a maximum of 5 years in prison rather than the possibility of life behind bars. Valley News Team's Bobby Fallett was at the courthouse all day and joins us live now in studio with the latest. Bobby.
Justin, Stacey, the defense continuing their case, but this morning it was about a witness that is close to Spencer, another one of his children. Now, the prosecution was making the case last week that it would be too traumatic to testify in front of Spencer, so Spencer left the courtroom when that testimony took place, but he could still hear what was said. Now, the main purpose of that testimony, again, to talk about a phone call that took place between the child that was supposed to be answered by Sonia Moen, but was instead answered by Spencer. Now, in closing arguments, the prosecution emphasizing that this would be a completely different picture if Spencer had just decided to help Sonia after their fight. Now, Moen's defense attorney making the case that the prosecution has not shown enough evidence to the jury for a murder conviction, but for the jury to find him guilty of the lesser option, like you explained, negligent homicide. Now, Justin, Stacey, deliberations, they are set to resume once again tomorrow at 9.
All right, thanks, Bobby, and we will be back in court tomorrow and bring you the latest right here on air and online.